Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll give others 2 more minutes to join, and then we'll kick off in a minute. Great. I see that there's still a few people joining, so oh, one last minute, and then we'll kick off. And thanks already for taking time to join us today. Great. Well, I'm sure some more people might join, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thanks a lot for joining us today for a kickoff webinar for consultation process around the concept of mineral credits in the ASM space. I'm really excited to be joined by my colleagues Angela from Fairphone and Marcin from the Alliance for Responsible Mining. My name is David, and I'm with the Impact Facility and Fair Cobalt Alliance. And we've done a lot of work over the last months and years actually to figure out how to meaningfully engage ASM from a downstream perspective, or from our perspective as NGOs working with ASM, how to figure out how artisanal miners can engage with the downstream and supply the downstream in one way or another. And all roads led to this webinar, where we are about to share a lot of our learnings, especially from Fairphone's perspective. Angela is going to kick off in a second, and then how we generalize those learnings to develop a blueprint for what responsible mineral credits or book and claim-based engagement with ASM could look like. I'd like to point out that we are recording this session so that people that were unable to join today are able to watch back the recording. Um, and would also like to point out that there are English, French, and Spanish language channels. The three of us are actually going to speak in English, so you can either switch to the English channel or stay on original audio. If you would prefer a French or a Spanish translation, please go to the bottom of your options in Zoom and select the right translation channel there. We will stop the recording before we get to the Q&A so that you can ask any questions that you want. And the recording itself will live on our website for future reference for anybody that wants to contribute to the consultation process. And we'll get to that shortly. A couple of objectives for today. One is to contextualize why we're talking about this. That's going to be Angela's role, talking about downstream's long-term efforts of engaging meaningfully with ASM and how book and claim became one of the tools that is most effective and useful for Fairphone. We have a short video that we will try to show during previous technical tests. It somewhat worked. We will also be sharing the link to the video. So if you wanted to watch back the video in case the quality isn't great on your end because of the transmission from my side, please do feel free to watch it again on YouTube afterwards. It's only a 4-minute video. And then Marcin and I will talk you through what we call the blueprint. We'll keep that short, so this is not a way to bypass reading the actual documents. We hope that after this you'll be enticed to download the documents and read them. They're also available in all 3 languages. But we're trying to give a broad overview before we talk about the consultation process. This is not a finished piece of work. We are looking to get meaningful input to help improve this further because we believe that this has potential to scale, but in order for it to scale, all of your inputs and perspectives are really appreciated to make it a more robust and more credible framework than it already is. And with this, we'll hand over to you guys to pose questions. Given the format that this is a webinar and you're unable to unmute yourselves, I believe, please do use the questions in Q&A box or the comment box to provide questions. We'll read through them and we'll comment on them. And should we reach the top of the hour before we're able to respond to your question, I'll personally get back to you on email if you can also provide your email address or follow up with me after. But yeah, purpose of today is for you to get a general understanding of what this is all about and how you can contribute to the process. And we look forward to engaging with you over the coming weeks, one-to-one or in group sessions. And should you be interested to contribute, please get in touch and we'll get to how you can contribute towards the end of the session. And with this, Angela, I'd love to hand over to you.
Thanks a lot, David, and thanks everyone for joining. I want to give a bit of a perspective of how Fairphone landed at Book and Claim after a long journey of trying to engage and source from ASM. Fairphone is a Dutch electronics company, and we actually started out as a campaign against conflict minerals in 2010, and then became a company that decided that our mission should be to prove that things can be done better. That is to say, from the very beginning, our goal was to engage with ASM, to source from responsible ASM, and to integrate them into our supply chains, which is important to know for the whole story I'm going to tell now. Next slide, please. If you look honestly at the supply chains of electronics companies, it's key to understand that there's a known value chain that goes maybe one, two, three, maybe four tiers down. And then it becomes a very dynamic value chain that has to be inferred and that changes constantly. And these tiers have thousands or hundreds of different entities, and they change over the course of the years or even over the course of the months. So Fairphone has tried to map these supply chains to arrive at the mine or to integrate responsible mining into our products. But as you can see, this is very difficult. The key things to take away from this is that things change because supply chains are dynamic. They have to be dynamic because sometimes stock runs out or transport ways are blocked or there's tariffs or export bans, and all the suppliers have backup suppliers. So it keeps changing. And the other thing I want to point out is that even if, as Fairphone, we would like to source directly from a responsible mine or responsible ASM, that is not possible for us because we still need all these tiers and all these actors to help us actually produce a phone or an audio product. So with that in mind, we can go to the next slide. I want to share how currently our due diligence expectations that are put on downstream companies are, on one hand, too easy because the expectation is that we map the smelters and refiners and also the countries of origin. But if we just look at 3Ts and cobalt, so only four of the over 50 materials in a phone, we already have over 100 countries, several dozen for each mineral, many of those high risk, and the overlap is 17 to 20 countries. So what do you do as a downstream company? This is really insufficient to actually engage and invest into ASM improvement, even though we know there's ASM production in these countries. And it incentivizes downstream companies to just stop at that level and say, okay, we just ban certain countries or certain producers. On the other hand, the expectations make it too hard because often the cure for the problem that I just outlined is posed as, okay, we need more physical traceability. We need to track more. We need to go deeper. But if you consider it is a dynamic chain that changes all the time, this is impossible unless you have a global surveillance system that gives you every second an update of where the materials is flowing. In addition, it's also economically unviable because, refiners need to fill their facilities, they need to mix things also metallurgically. And geopolitically, more and more, it's difficult to share data across different geographies. On top of that, if we want to trace, we spend a lot of resources, a lot of paperwork and audits into setting that up instead of actually going directly towards improvements on the ground where they are most needed. Now, I want to say this is really not advocating for not doing due diligence or not doing supply chain mapping. They are really needed, but these things can go in parallel if you understand the hotspots and where they're coming from. So all to say, the conclusion right now where we end up is that downstream a company like us, we cannot reward responsible producers. We cannot send that signal that we want responsible ASM because this physical traceability is often impracticable. So we push the responsibility up to the smelters and refiners, but they are often volume-based businesses with very low margins. And therefore, it's also difficult for them to then invest in improvements upstream, which again means you push the responsibility further onto ASM to say, hey, you need to become responsible and you need to, invest in becoming, in coming and growing towards an international standard. So this is the current situation we are in, and not much is changing for ASM. Next slide. I'm going to run through quickly how we came to those conclusions and how we then try to innovate with the book and claim model. We started out with tungsten, and we thought this was going to be easy because for tungsten, we saw that tungsten is concentrated in one single subcomponent of a phone. And therefore, we could reach out to that subcomponent supplier. We could also outreach to a particular mine in Rwanda that was selling its products to a refiner in Europe, and we could connect that chain. Bear in mind that was a lot of work. We needed to check documentation at each of these steps. We also pay extra costs because, of course, the supplier has their own sources, and if we want a specific source, we need to pay more for import, for transportation. But we achieved it. So we thought, okay, this is something we can do for other ASM, responsible ASM. So we went to gold, and this is a wholly different beast because it's about 2 milligrams in one phone. This is spread across 170 about subcomponents in one phone. We identify more than 100 smelters every year. They also change every year. So this was going to be much more difficult, but we started out with saying, okay, we want to integrate fair trade certified gold. So we worked with Fairtrade and Fairever and a Fairtrade licensed refiner in Europe to see if we could set up a chain. And we worked really hard to connect the dots between our final assembly. We tried to engage at first one of these 170 component suppliers and to track the gold through the refiner and the Shanghai Gold Exchange into our products. That was a lot of work. In the end, we managed to convince 5 component suppliers of these 170 suppliers, and it covered around 20% of our gold use. After all this effort, for 7 years, we tried to get the documentation, we tried to engage with everyone, but we only managed to really cover 20% of the gold we used. Next slide, please. And that's really when we hit the reality because this is not scalable. No other downstream company will make this effort. There's countless hours to collect the data. You cannot really verify the data that you receive. The suppliers we engage, they don't care about these tiny amounts. We have no leverage. And actually, the most important thing is that the 80% of gold, we still don't contribute to any improvements there. So that's when we started working with the Alliance for Responsible Mining and the Fairmine certification, where we said, okay, let's look at the Fairmine gold mines and use Fairmine gold credits that existed already in the Fairmine standard. So it means that we account for the 80% of the gold we use, the remaining 80% that is not fair trade. And we purchase the equivalent amount of Fairmine gold credits from a Fairmine certified mine that sells this into the local trading network. And we pay the premium for those credits, and that goes directly into the mine and into the community. So immediately we can cover 80% or the remaining 80% of the gold, and we contribute to improvements at the mine site. Next slide, please. We then thought this is also a great model for materials and areas where there's no certified mines yet. And many of the ASM mines, of course, are not yet certified or do not yet reach an international standard. And these are actually the ones that need most investment and most support. We can't just push a standard upstream and then not support them. So we applied this model also in the cobalt context in the DRC, where there's no certified mines yet. But there is a partner mine with the Fair Cobalt Alliance that is dedicated to improving towards international standards. So again, we as Fairphone account for the amount of cobalt we use in our products per year, and we purchase cobalt credits for this, representing the same amount of that cobalt produced on the ground under improved conditions. And with that fund, the credit fund, we contribute to improving the mine sites towards international standards. And that makes sense because we know our cobalt is coming from DRC, even though we cannot fully track it, it's coming from DRC. So this book and claim model is a different chain of custody model, and we apply it now to not only gold and cobalt, but also silver and copper. And we believe especially for ASM, this could be really a way forward because it rewards improvements and it rewards responsible producers, and you invest directly in prevention, mitigation, and improvements on the ground. Of course, you still need to verify things on the ground at the mine and also at us, what we say about these credits, to make sure it's credible. Next slide, please. And I'm almost done. Maybe just to share also a bit from the cost perspective. This looks like a very full slide, but I think that the main statement that I would like to make here is that with book and claim, actually, the biggest amount of money stays at or goes to the mine site towards improvement, and the smallest cost of downstream actors we have. Because for segregated or mass balance chain, as you remember, the tungsten chain we set up, or also the fair trade chain that we set up, had big costs in terms of documentation, audits, logistics, transportation. And it was just a lot of effort without necessarily the improvements that we wanted. And I think maybe Marcin can later on also share a bit from the miners' perspective. They also incurred higher cost because they also needed to, document and trace. And so this is really a model where you can support ASM, and you spend more directly on the actual improvement. Next slide, please. This is a model that is not just, we didn't take this out of thin air. This is really a chain of custody model that is recognized by various standards, including the ISEAL chain of custody model definitions, also the UN Global Compact, and IRMA has a chain of custody standard that also includes book and claim. And it's something that is actually applied also in other sectors. Next slide, please. We've done a lot of work looking at how other commodity sectors use these book and claim models, and they're actually common in quite a few. And maybe the most well-known or familiar is the renewable energy certificates, which function in exactly the same way. You can purchase certificates from renewable energy producers. They feed their production into the grid. It gets mixed with every other production because there's only one grid and electricity is electricity. And the certification states that you use that renewable energy, and this way you can actually reward renewable energy producers. It functions a bit similar in palm oil, sugar, biofuels, and aviation fuels. There's slight differences, but this is very commonly applied also in other sectors. Last slide, please. So for Fairphone, we really want to advocate for recognition of these book and claim models and also for regulation of these book and claim models. Of course, they have to be robust, they have to be credible, there have to be certain rules around them. And this is what we want to support also with the framework we are putting out now, where we set down certain rules or considerations for how you can set up these models. Ultimately, this helps ASM get the investment that it needs to, adhere to international standards. It incentivizes through a market mechanism, responsible ASM production, to go into global market in all our joint risk hotspots, as we call them from a downstream perspective. The smelters don't have to carry the burden alone. Downstream also invests in line with what they actually consume, not just a random side budget that they have somewhere. And we can really move to systemic change if we apply this more globally. I think I'll stop there. I haven't spoken about the impact, the actual impact that we are seeing from the funds that we are generating through the credits purchases. This is something the video can show. If it works, David, I'll hand over to you if you can or want to show it, and then we can
Perfect.
move.
Yeah, we'll try. And then if we see in the comment box that it's not working for people, then we might just stop halfway through. But yeah, the video we are about to watch has been produced by the EPRM, the European Partnership for Responsible Minerals, who are also supporting the work of developing the blueprint and the scaling of cobalt credits in the DRC for the last few years, and we're very grateful for that. And it really now highlights the people that were on the selling end of the cobalt credits in that case, and I hope the video works.
Le cobalt représente tout, la nourriture, l'emploi, la santé. Plusieurs communautés vivent de cette exploitation. Les entreprises industrielles ne préfèrent pas consommer les produits des artisanaux parce qu'ils supposent que ces derniers exploitent les minerais dans de mauvaises conditions. Il n'y a pas de principes qui sont respectés, qui répondent ou qui suivent la norme congolaise, tout comme la norme internationale. Les cobalt associés avec les cobalt ici de l'activité industrielle, et on a mis ça dans un seul lot, ça devient pratiquement impossible de dissocier. Donc pour eux, c'est difficile de se contourner à ne pas payer les minerais issus de l'activité artisanale. Les mineurs n'ont pas de sites d'exploitation. Jusqu'à présent, ils sont dans des sites tolérés, mais ils n'ont pas de sites. Et cela revient toute une difficulté pour qu'ils accèdent à la formalisation.
Kwa difficulté iwe ya mingi na sur le plan financier, hatuna na makse kwa mabanki kunini.
Sasa pale mpepo ya wenyewe ya Mungu ile pale natupatia pale yule. Tamuve tachukua na njimu tunafika nouveau mwezi. Pepo haina kumjika mtu leza tana kufu.
L'histoire de morceaux de cobalt est très importante. Les entreprises doivent prendre la responsabilité pour que les choses soient bien faites. En finançant ces projets dans la mine, les conditions s'améliorent automatiquement. Aujourd'hui, les artisanaux travaillent dans de bonnes conditions. Prenons l'exemple de Dynamo. C'est le fruit des crédits cobalt.
Ufele, madinamo inatusaidia sana na souffert.
ekonomi tuingine par rapport ya kumbele. Inaweza rifia watoto kwa masomo, inatusaidia sana.
Je suis optimiste que les créateurs seront en mesure de travailler dans de bonnes conditions. Bon, je ne dirais pas de bonnes, mais ça va s'améliorer.
Great. Again, thank you to the EPRM. It makes it a bit less theoretical and a lot more concrete to actually see the people that we're talking about and think about them as real people and not just statistics somewhere in Angela's supply chain mapping. Now we're getting to the second part of the webinar where we're going to introduce the framework. The document can be found on our website. That's the Fair Cobalt Alliance website. We'll also circulate links to the documents in English, French, and Spanish after the webinar with anybody that has signed up to the webinar. And we believe this is useful to downstream companies. We want to engage with regulators around this. We want to hear from artisanal miners how this system could be further improved so that they can adopt it or drive the adoption themselves. And also talk to investors and funders that might be exposed to ASM through their investment or are looking to offset or compensate or engage because they know that ASM is somewhere in the supply chain or in their investments, but they are unable to make the direct connection, as Angela has shown in great detail. The guide is organized by 10 short chapters, and we'll give an overview of them now. As I said, we won't have the time today to explain everything in detail, so we wanted to highlight the structure and some of the underlying thinking and hope to engage with you then either in writing or on follow-up calls to solicit your feedback and your thoughts and your questions. Angela showed very clearly that book and claim is not something that we invented. It's a commonly accepted way of engaging with smallholder producers across a range of commodities or intangible commodities. If we look at renewable energy, where it's difficult to talk about a physical product. And sometimes people talk about certificates. Sometimes schemes talk about tokens. We've now talked about credits in the past, but we also know that even the term credit carries a lot of connotation. And so one of the things that we are curious about is what nomenclature would work with the constituencies that you engage with if you had to make an argument internal to your organization to explore something like this if you are a downstream company. And really important because we've seen some discussions around this online recently. This is not instead diligence on your supply chain, but it's the result of the diligence that leads you to adopt credits. So where you have latent exposure to ASM, you're unable to integrate directly into your supply chain. Book and claim helps manage, remediate, and mitigate risks. And it helps do so in line with the level of consumption that you have as an organization. This said, it doesn't resolve you from any legal obligations to map your supply chain, to engage with your tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers and try to drive change through the supply chain. And it is particularly relevant to downstream companies at the end of complex supply chains or people somewhere middle to end of the supply chain. The closer you are to ASM, the more we would encourage you to engage directly and source responsibly. As we thought about what makes a credible standard, and we have the Fair Mine credits that ARM has launched a few years ago, and now the Cobalt credits that the Fair Cobalt Alliance with the Olympic Facility has launched, as well as gold credits that the Olympic Facility is also doing in East Africa, that served as mineral-specific examples we could draw on. But we also challenged ourselves by doing that research that Angela highlighted, looking at other industries and what are common governance structures for those different credit schemes to make them robust, scalable, and transparent. And we identified the 8 elements that are highlighted here. So who runs the scheme? Who owns it? That's a question that needs to be answered. again, what standards are we reporting? Because it needs to be based on something. It is not just the pure fact that you're an artisanal miner, but we need to benchmark against something. And they might be different for different commodities or even different schemes on the same commodity, but it's important to have transparency on that. Are credits meant to be sold once and then retired, or are we looking at a market where you could potentially resell credits again? How do you price credits so that it's meaningful for the upstream, but it's also affordable to the downstream? What's fair and what makes logical sense? And then what happens to the money? Is it paid out in cash to the producers, or is somebody managing the funds on their behalf? How do they reap the benefits, and who gets the money? If you're looking at a cooperative or an SME, that's your counterparty. How is that money being spent? Really important to drive adoption is to make sure that downstream can make claims around this and communicate both internally and externally about their credit engagement, but it also needs to be done well to avoid the accusations of greenwashing or whitewashing of supply chain due diligence. And that is linked very closely to verification and assurance. A big reason for the book and claim system is that we want to drive down costs by limiting the need for segregation and auditing an entire supply chain, but we still need to have a credible verification upstream. And lastly, how does the scheme report about where credits come from and what happens with the money, in line with what we've outlined before? And so what we are going to do now is briefly touch on some of those considerations. The blueprint doesn't try to give you an answer of what it should be, but provides some of the options and challenges people that want to replicate the system in different geographies or different commodities to just think this through, to make sure that there's a common standard of quality across the governance of these schemes, to avoid that in the future there could be examples that are poorly executed or poorly thought through that then reflect poorly on all other schemes by association. We've touched on this. We've looked at the governance documents that UN Global Compact provides, the ICL, which is the certification for certifications that looks at governance of certification schemes. We've drawn on lessons from Fair Mind credits and the Cobalt credits, and looked extensively at the other sectors. And a full mapping of the schemes that we've looked at is also available on our website, if that's of interest to you. And it was truly a joint effort between the three of us on the call, organizationally. A lot more colleagues involved behind this. The EPRM has been really helpful in also facilitating discussions with the European Union and other stakeholders on the regulatory side. And one of our consortium members is DataStake, who are actually building the digital interface for this and have also really helped shape our thinking around scalability of this and how to structure data around these schemes. And with this, I'd like to hand over to Marcin, who's going to run us through some of these elements. And again, the idea is not to discuss everything in great level of detail, but to give you an idea of what you can find in the document underlying this. And then hopefully in self-study, you can get all the detail you want. Over to you, Marcin.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks to you and Angela for your leadership with that. I think it's really wonderful to work with you on this. Maybe just before I go into this, a couple of experiences also from the jewelry sector, from Fair Mind, and why this seems for us to be such an interesting option. So when we were working with gold, especially with small jewelers and small mines, you could see that actually the costs of logistics, the separate refining, from the mine all throughout the supply chain, the distribution to smaller players can cost 2 or 3 times more than the actual premium, the actual investment in the mine, right? So you're asking yourself, well, why are we actually doing this? If your answer is, this traceability is very important for me, you can pay for this. But we think that for the majority of participants who are really, into improving the lives of miners, but also communicate on this, the credits can be a great solution. And for the miners, it's also quite challenging when you need to time your production and accumulate enough material in order to export, at a specific time to a specific buyer. Sometimes, especially smaller mines, they need the cash flow, they need to move. So for them, it can be more convenient and more attractive to sometimes also sell to the local market. So we want to ensure that this production, these sales are not lost, but that they are still rewarded for the efforts that they make with the certification. So now, to the elements of the system. Let's start briefly going through them. Governance. David mentioned that governance is the foundation, really, of a scheme that implements credits. You need to define who is going to run the initiative. What are the roles? Is it going to be a not-for-profit or some kind of a multi-stakeholder arrangement? Importantly, how are decisions made? What's the accountability? What do you do with conflict of interest between verifying the mines, for example, but also selling the credits? So something that we think should really be a baseline and should be a very important part of it is a balance between voices of miners, including also women and workers, and the buyers of credits. So you want to find this level where it's a good value proposition for all. So let's go to the second one. So then we mentioned the underlying standards. So you want to know what's behind the credits, this framework of good mining practices that the mine should follow, and also the attributes of impact, so the social improvements, environmental positive or environmental management that leads to positive outcomes, or economic benefits that the miners can get. And these standards, we think, should serve as a roadmap for miners. So you want to set minimum eligibility criteria to get them into the scheme, but also a pathway for continuous growth, and the credits should contribute to this journey. And of course, it also has to satisfy the needs of both sustainability perspective and compliance of companies that buy the credits. When discussing standards for ASM and to encourage interoperability and avoid reinventing the wheel, we propose the craft code as a benchmark, which is a standard for artisanal miners, already aligned with the OECD due diligence guidance that has been widely used for different minerals, also developed with the support of the EPRM. And using craft as an underlying standard can be helpful to compare between different credit schemes, but also it's flexible enough to integrate different priorities or the levels of progressivity that each scheme wishes to pursue. Next, please. So credit life cycle, what do we mean by that? Well, David and Angela explained that a credit needs to be linked to something tangible. So in this case, the unit of production of mineral. So it can be grams for gold or tons of cobalt or copper. And to ensure the trust, the system must define how this production, this responsible production, hopefully, is traced and verified in the mine. And then how you convert it into this credit that you can sell. And this way also, buying the credit, you do have traceability at the mine site, and the traceability of impact that you can really connect to a specific mine site. And then if someone purchases the credit, of course, it must be removed from the system, and the system must ensure that there is no double counting. So that you can't sell the same credit twice, or also claim more than you purchased. And as we mentioned, a digital system that the data stake has also been proposing should be an optimal choice, especially if such a system can be scaled up. And the next slide goes to pricing, right? So how much is a credit worth? What price should we put it? And here again, the importance of finding a balance between making it worthwhile for the miners, but also being competitive enough so that it actually makes sense for companies to buy that. And there are different criteria that should be considered. So for miners, how to motivate them that they invest in improvements. Will the price of the credits, this additional investment that they get, enough to cover their needs and invest in progress? But on the other hand, if it's too much, you may not attract the amount of buyers to make it sustainable. And of course, to make it sustainable, you also need to think about the costs of running the system. So some kind of administrative charge should also be included in the management. So over to you, David, to explain the rest of the criteria.
Thanks, Marcin. Now that we've agreed on a price and people are purchasing credits, the question is what happens with the money? And what can this money be used for, and what is off limits? How do we decide priorities? Because there's going to be a limited pool of money, at least until this is a huge success. So somebody needs to prioritize something. And here we are proposing to replicate the fund allocation committees that we have in some way or another, both for the cobalt credits and also with the fair mine credits, where it's a community committee that decides on how to allocate the funds. But in those funds, not all voices are created equal in terms of decision making. So how do you make sure that more marginalized groups, often women or potentially migrant workers or whatever else it might be specific to the supply chain, have a fair say within that? And that could be a quota, that a specific share of the funds goes towards women-centric or child-centric projects, or it could be something else. And who manages the funds? Is the cooperative self-responsible in receiving and reporting against it, or is there a third-party intermediary to oversee spending and reporting? As is the case with the cobalt credits in Congo, where Imbic Facility is a trusted fund manager from both the cooperative side and the downstream side. And now talking about communications, what's fair to say so that we can promote book and claim and drive the adoption and also reward people for making the right choice in terms of investing in this without undermining the credibility of this? So where's the line between greenwashing and appropriate corporate claims? And how far does the purchase of credits need to relate to the footprint of people's material? If you were purchasing gold and you're using several tons of gold, but you're only purchasing kilos of equivalent for credits, is that appropriate or not? And again, we're not imposing a answer to what it should be, but it would be great for schemes to make up their minds on where it falls as part of the due diligence on the purchasing party and not just the producing party. And then how long are you allowed to make claims? If you purchase a credit once in 2025, can you still talk about supporting miners in Congo or in Colombia in 2030, or does it need to be an annual and recurring commitment? And also for the cooperatives on the ground, what can they communicate and how should they credit the source of funding, etc., to make sure that all stakeholders involved are getting a fair share of figurative credit around the credit purchase and sales. And now the second last element that we've highlighted is around verification. And here we differentiate between verification of upstream production claims, but also downstream claims in terms of how much they're consuming or how they publicly communicate. there could be different levels of reporting or data collection here. It could be that for some data points, self-reporting is sufficient because there's a sufficient level of trust or the data isn't risky enough to warrant second or third party verification. Second party verification could be possible if conflicts of interests are managed appropriately, as Marcin had briefly referenced, saying that the person selling credits, if they're the same as the person issuing credits, how do you get around that? And then third-party audits might be appropriate either from the beginning or at a certain size. For the Verkobel Alliance, we said that once we exceed $500,000 in credit sales annually, we'll have a third-party audit just to get peace of mind on the purchasing party side. But again, we're not stipulating specific thresholds. In the blueprint, we are nudging people to think through those questions. And then also, what happens if gaps are identified or regressions are identified? If people had a ESG score against the craft code of 50 or 60%, and then suddenly they regress on some of them, are they disqualified from selling credits until they've made up that gap, or how do you deal with this? And all of these are difficult but also interesting questions to tackle and think through. And then lastly, reporting. Credibility of any such scheme will depend highly on how transparent they are and how much information is made available to vested stakeholders, so upstream producers and purchasing parties, but also the public at large. And so here the question is just, now that we've validated and verified data to different degrees, how do we report and to whom do we report and in what cadence do we report? And that really provides a really fast-paced, high-level overview of everything that we've been breaking our heads around for the last few years, and we landed on something for our respective schemes, but have now informed the blueprint as such. And that brings us to the consultation. We're really excited about having all of you on this call and with this celebrating the launch of the consultation process. We'll be receiving comments in the different forms that are available until the 6th of August, and then we'll be using the summer and late summer, talking from a European perspective, to consolidate the feedback with the ambition of publishing a version 1.0 in September, which hopefully then gets adopted by or used by as many stakeholders as possible. Now, there's different ways how you can contribute. There's a form on our website where we've already mapped some of the questions that we think are most contentious or most interesting to get diverse feedback on. You can skip questions that you don't have an opinion on or you're not sure about. You can also email us and request a conversation. My email is on the last slide, and as I said, we'll follow up after the webinar, so it'll be easy to get in touch with me. And I'm sure you can also reach out to Marcin and Angela if you have a connection with them already. And we are planning to do a number of target group discussions with Spanish-speaking miners in Latin America, French-speaking miners in Francophone Africa, some English-speaking miners, but not only miners, also engaging with regulators, downstream companies, midstream, other NGOs. And we'll take all of the feedback that we receive until early August, and we'll also publish a consultation report where we summarize some of the changes that the updated version will have and also reflect on some of the difficult decisions we'll have to make in terms of dismissing some of the comments or siding one way or another. And as I said, the blueprint itself doesn't prescribe much. It's trying to provide exactly what the name says, a blueprint on how to replicate. But it's down to other practitioners, artisanal miners, regulators to fit it in how it feels right to them. And I believe we also have Ben from DataStake on the call. Ben, if you're able to say something now, otherwise I can speak to this. But in parallel to the blueprint, we've been building the digital infrastructure to host the registry for credits, for cobalt credits initially, but then hopefully expanding soon, called Eureka. And we're doing slightly more technical consultation around the digital infrastructure. So Ben, maybe you want to briefly discuss that. And technically, it's not even the right word, but it's different from the blueprint that we've just discussed. So I'll hand over to you, and we can circulate more information on that also in the follow-up email.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps very briefly to introduce it, it's a way to systemize some of the concepts that were discussed on today's call, from how production might be recorded, how a mine site concretely might be evaluated, so that the eligibility of production for credit issuance can be determined. How, as Martin spoke about, how the system might ensure that credits are only allocated and assigned and used once. All of these specifications, which are obviously intended to reflect all the principles discussed in the blueprint, are available and are continuously evolving documentation on the Oreca website, the application that implements the credit system. I will share the link to the website in the chat, and of course, this the documentation of the system, the specification of the system, which are present on the website, are entirely part of this consultation. If you have any comments on the system itself, on the design of the system, security features of the system, or other functionalities, please feel free to report them to the team.
Thank you. And we have a few more minutes left. I can see that there's already 2 questions in the Q&A. So there's a chat box in the Q&A function. If you could try to use the Q&A to pose your questions, it'll be easier for me to keep an overview. But first question is maybe something I can tackle, but would love, or maybe Angela, it's good for you to kick off actually. It's what will be the application cases for credit schemes that you propose beyond cobalt? Do you want to talk to this?
I mean, I think from a downstream perspective, or from a, let's say, electronics company perspective, we would hope to apply this across all ASM mined minerals, ideally, in our hotspot countries or countries of origin that we identify in our annual supply chain mapping. We are already applying it to 4 minerals now, and hopefully we can expand that.
Great. And the second question is, we're not proposing one scheme for all ASM in all geographies, but a blueprint for replication of the scheme. The question is, would companies create their own schemes or not? And I paraphrase the question as I read it out. But maybe to answer to that initially, and then Marcin, I'd love to hear your thoughts, maybe link to the craft code. There are so many decisions that need to be made that are context specific, whether that's the pricing or the origination, even the difference whether it's a certified mine, as it's the case with fair mine credits, or you're applying the craft code to legitimate but informal mines, as we do in cobalt with in cobalt with Fairphone around the cobalt credits. And so I believe it's useful to have a regional application. The blueprint provides the skeleton for filling in the decisions and reporting against how the schemes are structured. The cost centers for running these schemes are not necessarily on the sales side or the digital hosting, but they're really around the creation and verification of credits upstream. And so it would require either ASM umbrella organizations or NGOs or a company that sees a potential for marketing these credits to figure out a business case on how to finance this. But Marcin, would love to hear your thoughts on whether it's possible to have one overarching craft scheme book and claim system.
Everything is possible, but what we wanted is also to have a discussion, on the legitimacy of actually using the credits. And I think, both our organizations are already experimenting with it. But we still think that it's a concept that is quite new in the mineral space, while already quite mature in other sectors. So actually, also the discussion is about like what we would need for the industry to engage, and actually having these signs of demand and interest, and really like looking at the systemic potential of change and engagement with ASM that has a history of being quite complex. I think this is also an important part of the exercise.
Thanks, Marcin. In the chat box, there's a question around how sure you are with traceability that you're actually tied to Rwanda. Do you want to take that question, Angela?
Sure. For tungsten, as I showed in the slide, we really managed to get documentation from each of the tiers and from each of the companies involved. That is really not possible for most of the materials in the phone. We thought we could apply it everywhere, but it's literally for tungsten we managed to do so. For any other, or probably most other materials, this will not be possible. Specifically on gold, as I mentioned, it's in 170 subcomponents in tiny amounts, coming from hundreds of smelters that have, again, 20 plus countries of origin, of which I think many of are high risk for indeed smuggled gold or gold from sources that are not yet achieving a certain standard. So that is exactly the challenge we would like to tackle, to make sure that instead of just saying, oh, we don't want to source from this country, or we try to ignore it, we actually invest in prevention and mitigation where we can in those countries of origin, and we invest in more responsible ASM through a mechanism like the credits.
Thanks, Angela. And then in the Q&A box, there was one more question whether Impact Facility or ARM can work with cooperatives elsewhere beyond our current footprint. Maybe I'll start my scene and then you could close, because we've also reached the top of the hour. The ambition is to get enough downstream interest in adopting these credits that these systems can scale. There are financial constraints around scaling without demand, and so that's why we're going through this consultation. We want to figure out how to get this right in terms of value proposition to different stakeholders, including the people that are supposed to be footing the bill for purchasing credits. Because despite all the fantastic work that we've been able to do so far, we are not operating at the scale that we would like to be operating. And that makes scaling right now very difficult. I think there's about 5,000 cobalt credits readily available for purchase. You can email me if you want to purchase some or all of them. But yeah, I'll hand over to you, Marcin, and already to the rest of the audience. Thank you for joining today. And please get in touch with any of us if you want to get back to, into the conversation.
Thanks. And maybe to finish off also, we're ambitious. And one of the ideas is also to enable an infrastructure for different schemes, based on the craft code that can be accredited, so that we have economies of scale in bringing more cooperatives, but also work with local organizations. But at the same time, that there is no chaos, from the downstream perspective, and that we have a system that everyone can get engaged and that is aligned. So I think at the moment it's starting, but we really hope that in 5 years the answer to Augustin will be positive. They will be looking for cooperatives to bring them onto the system.
Perfect. Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Marcin. And thank you, everybody that joined online. And please do get in touch if you have any questions. and check out the website to find the documents and the form. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.